Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and hello to all of you. I'm Dr. Aisha. This is the video lecture for Chapter 3, Flexible Budget, Overhead Cost Variance and Management Control. Alright, so as in Chapter 2 before, you study about flexible budget and direct costs, which includes direct material and direct labor. However, in this chapter, we are going to cover about the overhead cost variance, where overhead is actually a part of indirect costs. So, as you already learned before in the previous course, that is in Management Accounting 1, costing we can divide into two main parts. The first one is direct costing, which includes material and labor. The second part is what we call as indirect costs, where it can be divided into variable overhead and fixed overhead costs. Okay, in regards to variable overhead costs, this is something that need to be planned by the managers in the company. We can see the example of manufacturing overhead costs, which includes energy, like electricity, machine maintenance, engineering support, and all other types of indirect materials. This cost changes according to the quantity of the unit of production. That's why we call it as variable. Okay, it is variable in the sense that this cost change based on the quantity of the output that has been produced by the company. In order for managers to plan for variable overhead costs, managers have to focus on activities that actually create superior product or service for the customers. They have to identify whether this variable overhead cost is something that really contribute to create a superior product. If yes, then they can or they must focus on that activities. If, for example, they found that such costs actually do not add value to the product, so they basically need to eliminate that cost or that types of activities. Alright, so for example, let's say company want to produce a track sheet that can be used for long lasting, high quality track sheet. Therefore, the cost of maintaining the sewing machine is actually very important, because if the sewing is good, then the track sheet is can be is not subject to any deficiency or any problem in near future. So basically it can be a long lasting track sheet. So this is something, the cost of maintaining the sewing machine is important, and it also need to be planned by the managers when they want to do the maintenance for the sewing machine itself, for example. And it also need to be scheduled in terms of timing, in terms of costing, and they have to do it in an effective way. Alright, normally when the company wants to calculate the cost, the overhead cost per output unit, they would use standard costing in order to do so. So standard costing, this is basically the definition of standard costing, where it is a system that traces direct costs to output produced by multiplying the standard price or rates by the standard quantities of input allowed for actual output. And secondly, it allocates overhead costs on the basis of the standard overhead cost rates times the standard quantities of the allocation basis allowed for the actual output produced. Alright? The management accounting textbooks sometimes interchangeably use budgeted rate and standard rate. So if you look at this definition, this might be quite tough for you to understand. However, I will give you an example and how basically it works. Alright, now we look at how to develop budgeted variable overhead rates using the standard costing system, and hopefully by looking at this example you'll be able to understand it clearly. Alright, so for us to develop the budgeted variable overhead rates. For this, the aim is basically for us to calculate what will be the cost, the budgeted variable overhead cost rate per output unit. Alright, so this is basically the aim, and this is basically showing you how the process or steps in order for us to do this calculation. There are 4 steps overall. The first one, we need to choose the period to be used for the budget. Okay, bear in mind that we are doing currently developing budgeted variable overhead rates. Okay, because there are 2 types. Number 1 is budgeted variable overhead rates. The second part is budgeted fixed overhead rates. So now we are talking about the budgeted variable overhead rate. Okay, now look at the step number 1. Choose the period to be used for the budget. Okay, so normally company use 12 months budget period, and therefore the annual overhead rate is used normally, the annual. Okay, so the rate is used based on annual, not based on monthly or whatever, because normally the period for budget is about 12 months, okay, or equal to 1 year. The second step is to select the cost allocation basis to be used in allocating the variable overhead cost to the output produced. Sometimes, okay, this is just an example for you to understand the context. Company use machine hours as the cost allocation base. Why they use machine hour? Because they believe that the number of machine hours is the sole cost driver for variable overhead. Alright? In the sense that, for example, let's say company take 0.40 of the machine hour per actual output unit. For budgeted output of 144,000 track sheets in 2017, the company machine hour is 0.40 times with 144,000. So the total machine hour is 57,600. Okay? Alright, so as in this example, okay, since managers believe that the machine hour is the sole cost driver for variable overhead and that it is related, therefore they use it as a base. And let's say the company wants to produce 144,000, and at the same time they understand that they need to take 0.40 of the hours for them to produce 1 output unit. Therefore the total for machine hours is this, okay, in this company. Number 3, the step number 3 is to identify the variable overhead cost associated with each cost allocation base. So in this part, we have to identify, we have to gather, you know, all of the variable costs. We have to collect, okay, we have to know, the company have to understand, and they have to calculate what are the costs under this category. What are the variable overhead costs incurred? So the example includes energy, maintenance, engineering support, indirect material, indirect labor, and they have to gather all of this. And let's say by looking at this example, okay, let's say the total budgeted variable overhead cost after they calculate the total cost is all 1,728,000. Okay, alright, so here is actually the step 3. And in the step 4, what we need to do is to compute the rate per unit of each cost allocation base used to allocate the variable overhead cost to the output produced, where, you know, possibly if you look at this definition, this might be scared you, but it's okay, don't worry. What actually it means is just like to divide 3 to 4. Alright, so the total here, alright, you divide with 57,600. Sorry, not divide 3 to 4, but divide 3 to 2. Okay, this is called in step 3 and divide with step 2. Okay, 57,600. So the total, you can see here 30 is actually the standard machine hour for allocating its variable overhead cost. So this total cost we allocate to the machine hours as we calculated before in step 2, and we can get here 30 per standard machine hour for allocating its variable overhead cost. So this 30, alright, is called as the standard rate per output unit. Okay, it is simple, right? It's not that difficult. It's quite straightforward basically. Alright, so when we want to calculate the budgeted variable overhead cost rate per output unit, this is basically the formula. Budgeted input allowed per output unit times with budgeted variable overhead cost rate per input unit. Okay, and this 0.40 hour per track sheet, this is something we already know in step 2. Okay, here if you look at step 2, company take basically for each unit they take 0.40 of machine hour. Okay, 0.40 hour per track sheet per one unit. Alright, times with budgeted variable overhead cost rate per input. This is something we calculate in step 4. In step 4 we calculate for this. Alright, so this is 30 here, and we can get here the budgeted variable overhead cost rate per output unit is actually 12 ringgit per track sheet. Okay, so what does it mean by this 12 ringgit per track sheet? The 12 ringgit per track sheet rate is actually the budgeted variable overhead cost rate in the company's static budget for the 2017, and this 12 ringgit per track sheet rate actually represent the amount by which managers expect that the variable overhead cost to change when the amount of output changes. So, for example, let's say the number of track sheet increases 1 unit, the variable overhead cost will also increase by 12 ringgit because it is, 12 ringgit is for one output. So once it's increased up to 1 unit, then the variable overhead cost will also increase accordingly with the amount of 12 ringgit. Okay? Alright, now we look at the planning for fixed overhead costs. Okay? Example of fixed overhead costs includes plant leasing costs, depreciation on plant and equipment, salaries of plant managers, and these costs basically fixed regardless of the quantity of the unit produced. Okay, and it focuses on the essential activity only, and they have to be planned to be efficient in the sense that, for example, let's say on leasing machine, right? Let's say the company want to lease machines. So the quantity, how many machines they want to lease, is something that they need to think, because if they, for example, just lease, like small number of machine, they're possibly unable to cope with the demand. Or for example, if they lease too many machines, it might lead to overcapacity. Alright, so the amount of demand possibly lower than the machines that they have. So this overcapacity is also not good for the company. Alright, so here I will show you the standard costing for developing budgeted fixed overhead rate. Alright, similar or very close to what we have done before on the budgeted variable overhead rate. It also comprises of 4 main steps. Alright, so as for the step 1, we have to choose the period to be used for the budget. So since we're talking for fixed overhead costs, normally it is, like 1 year, the period for the budget for overhead costs. Second step, we have to select the cost allocation basis to use in allocating the variable overhead costs to the output. So let's say company use machine hours as the cost allocation base for firm's fixed overhead costs because the managers believe that in long run the fixed overhead costs will increase or decrease according to the level of machine hour. So this is basically based on the understanding, based on the past experience of the managers. So since managers believe that machine hours is the suitable cost allocation base for them to allocate the firm's fixed overhead costs, so managers can do so. Alright. In other words, the amount of machine hour is used as the only cost driver for fixed overhead costs. So as in this case, machine hour is the only cost driver used by the managers to allocate the fixed overhead costs. It is important to note that managers can also use other types of cost allocation basis that they think it might be suitable for the company. So as in this example, managers feel that machine hour is the suitable cost allocation for allocating the fixed overhead costs. Okay, so the number of machine hour is the denominator in budgeted fixed overhead rate computation and called as denominator level. Okay, and for example, let's say the company expects to operate a capacity in fiscal year 2017 with budgeted usage of 57,000 machine hours for a budgeted output of 144,000 tractions. So this is the information given to you. Okay, this is just an example. Alright, the third step is for us to identify what are the, this is not variable, this is the fixed. Okay, the fixed overhead costs associated with each cost allocation base. So since company choose machine hour as the only cost allocation base to allocate fixed overhead, it grouped all costs into single cost pool. So they have to calculate, they have to sum up how much they have to bear for the fixed overhead costs for the company. So the cost includes, for example, depreciation on plant and equipment leasing costs, as well as the plant manager's salary. So let's say, for example, the company finally sum up all the fixed overhead costs and they found that the costs are 3,312,000. Okay, and after that, in step 4, they have to compute the rate per unit of each cost allocation based on the allocated they have to compute the rate per unit of each cost allocation base used to allocate the variable overhead cost to the output produced. So basically, this is referring to this calculation below here, where the formula is budgeted total cost in fixed overhead divide with the budgeted total quantity of cost allocation base. So as we already calculate in step 3, the total cost, the total fixed overhead cost is 3,312,000 here. Alright. Here. And we divide it with 57,600,000 cost allocation base, and we can get here 57.50 per machine hour. So under the standard costing, the 57 ringgit and 50, this is actually the fixed overhead cost per machine hour. Okay, and it's usually expressed as a standard cost per output unit. So this is the basis that we use when we want to calculate the cost per unit that has been produced by the company for fixed overhead costs. Alright, now we move forward with variable overhead cost variance. As in this chapter, I will cover three main parts of cost variance in overhead. We only will cover for the variable overhead cost variance, and we're not going to look at the fixed overhead cost variance, in the sense that fixed overhead, the cost is always fixed. So we just learn up to the syllabus, will just cover up to variable overhead cost variance. In this variable overhead cost variance, we will look at the flexible budget analysis, variable overhead efficiency variance, as well as variable overhead spending variance. Alright, so this is the example, okay, that we're going to look at. The following data are for April 2017, when Sporty Style produced and sold 10,000 track shirts. So the information given to you, the output units, right? So actual result is 10,000. Flexible budget amount, the amount that they budgeted they want to produce, also 10,000. Machine hours per output unit, 0.45. Here 0.40. Machine hours 1 times 2. Okay, column 1 times with column 2, we got here 4,500 of machine hours for the actual, but for the budgeted is 4,000 hours. Variable overhead costs for actual is 130,500, and for budgeted is 120,000. Variable overhead cost per machine hour, so item 4 divide with item 3, so we got here 29 ringgit and 30 ringgit respectively. And variable overhead cost per output unit, column 4 divide with column 1, okay, we got here for the actual is 13.05 ringgit, and for the flexible budget amount, the budgeted amount is 12 ringgit. Alright, so by using this information, we are going to prepare the flexible budget analysis. It is quite straightforward, because this variable overhead flexible budget variance, we just need to collect what be the actual cost incurred, and we have to deduct with the flexible, the budgeted. Alright, so as in this case, if you look at this information given to you, the variable cost overhead cost is 130,500, and this one is 120,000, and the actual is higher than the budgeted, so it leads to unfavorable situation, because this is cost, and once the actual is higher than what we budgeted, it seems that there is something wrong that need to be investigated, and this leads to unfavorable situation. Alright, next is where we have to calculate the variable overhead efficiency variance. So this is the formula for variable overhead efficiency variance, where it is actually the difference between actual quantity of the cost allocation base used and budgeted quantity of the cost allocation base that should have been used to produce the actual output, multiplied with the budgeted variable overhead cost per unit of the cost allocation base. So my advice is, you should not be scared with this definition. Actually, it is a manifestation of this formula exactly, and the formula is just simply you look at the actual quantity of the variable overhead cost allocation base minus with the budgeted quantity of the variable overhead cost allocation base, allow for the actual output. So as we can see here, alright, 4,500. Okay, so the actual is actually 10 times with 0.45. This is the budgeted 10,000 times with 0.40, so we have to come up with this. So 4,500 here. This is the actual quantity of the variable overhead cost allocation base used, because we actually use machine hour for this. Alright, so this is the cost allocation we use, machine hours. Total is 4,500. Okay, the budgeted is actually based on what? Based on this. Alright, we budgeted, we plan normally for us to produce 10,000 track shirt. Normally for per unit, the machine hour is 0.40. This is what we allocated. Okay, so times with this, and sorry, you have to minus this with this, and times with 30 per hour. This is the budgeted variable overhead cost per unit. All right, and this is here. This is budgeted amount. All right, so this is variable overhead cost per machine hour because we already allocated with our machine hour. Okay, 4 divided with 3. So this one here is 30. And all right, we can see here, this is 4,500 hours minus with 4,000 hours times with 30 per hour. We can get here 15,000 unfavorable situation. Okay, unfavorable of overhead efficiency variance in the sense that we plan just 4,000 hours, okay, but in reality we need 4,500 hours, means that we are not very efficient in doing, the company are actually not very efficient in doing their job. So that's why it leads to this unfavorable situation of 15,000. Alright, so when this situation occurs, when there is an unfavorable situation like this, it is important for the company to investigate why all of this thing happened. So the possible causes for exceeding budget, why we actually planned just for 4,000 but in reality it happened to be 4,500. This is something that the company have to think further and the managers have to take into account. It is possible that the workers were less efficient than expected in using machine. That's why the number of machine hours is higher. If, for example, the worker, possibly, someone who is very competent, obviously they can do the task in a short, period. Otherwise, if, for example, the worker is not that competent, not good in preparing or not good in producing the products, not good in sewing or cutting the material, etc., etc., this might lead to delay. So this is something that management accountant have to address and have to think further. So the potential management response, which include the possibly the human resource department, we have to encourage HR department to implement between employee hiring practices and training procedures. So it means that if the workers are not that competent, they have to undergo training programs to make sure that they are good enough in handling the production in the company. Other possible causes might be the production scheduler inefficiently scheduled job resulting in more machine hours used than budgeted. Okay, so this is the potential management response includes improved plan operation by installing production scheduling software. Sometimes the schedule is not as expected, or sometimes there's a problem with the scheduling program for the job. So that's why it needs more machine hours than what they budgeted. Or sometimes it's because of the machine having a problem. Okay, so if the machine having a problem, they actually plan just 4,000 hours, but in reality it drags to 4,500 hours. So that's why the preventive maintenance need to be done on all of the machine, and this is something that they need to take into account. Or is it because of the sales staff want to deliver earlier than promise? They promise to deliver the products earlier than scheduled, for example. So that's why more machine hours is used. So this is something that the company or the managers also have to think further in regards to the production schedule with sales staff and the distributors, and share information with them, make sure that all of the parties or all of the department in the company, they know actually what actually happened. Or for example, if this kind of things actually occurred in the company. Other than that, it is possible that the budgeted machine time standard was set too tight, in the sense that once they develop the budget, they are probably neglect some other things. They don't something that they overlook, for example. So that's why so far as the potential for management response is to commit more resources to develop appropriate standards, they have to come up with a specific calculation on how to set the budget in an accurate way. Alright, next is variable overhead spending variance, and in this variance analysis, here is basically the formula. actual variable overhead costs per unit of cost allocation base minus with the budgeted variable overhead cost per unit of cost allocation base times with actual quantity of the variable overhead cost allocation base used. Okay, so we should look at the information given to us. Alright, so if you look at the actual result here is 29 per machine hour, budgeted is 30, okay, per machine hour times with actual quantity of the variable. Okay, so the actual is 4,500. So -1 per machine hour times with 4,500 machine hours, we got here 4,500 favorable. Okay, now we look at the explanation for this. Alright, so as in this situation, we can see that the budgeted variable overhead cost per unit of cost allocation base is 30 per machine hour. This is something that they budgeted, but in actual, just 29 per machine hour is needed. So when they allocate the actual variable overhead cost per unit of cost allocation base, this is 29, this is 30. So this is actually higher than the actual. That's why it leads to favorable situation of the variable overhead spending variance. Okay, so if I show all of this information, the calculation that we have done before, I transform into a columnar presentation of variable overhead variance analysis, then the figure will look like this. Okay, so as usual, as you already learned before, there will be 3 columns, 1, 2, 3. Actual input quantity times with actual rate, actual input quantity times with budgeted rate, budgeted input allowed for actual output times with budgeted rate. Okay, so here actual cost, actual input quantity is 4,500. Alright, times with actual rate, this one is 29 actual rate, and the budgeted rate is 30. So it leads to this spending variance of 4,500 favorable. And as for efficiency variance, we compare between column 2 and column 3. Alright, as for here, we can see the actual is 4,500, while the budgeted is actually 0.40 hour per unit times with the 10,000 units times with 30, that is the budgeted rate. So it equal to 4,000, something that we already discussed before, and times with 30 per hour, and we can got here 120,000. And as we can see here, the efficiency variance, it leads to unfavorable situation, okay, of 15,000, in the sense that the actual is higher, okay, the hours, the actual input quantity is higher than the budgeted. And we already discussed in the previous slide that why this leads to unfavorable situation and what types of response that management have to take. Okay, and as we already look at the flexible budget variance, alright, so this is the flexible budget variance where we compare between actual and the flexible amount of this column 3 with column 1, and it leads to this flexible budget variance of 10,500. Okay, alright, so spending variance is between column 1 and column 2. Efficiency variance is between column 2 and column 3. Alright, so this is the answer in the columnar presentation, where you can easily see the level 2 and level 3 analysis for variable overhead variance. Alright, so here is the tutorial questions in regards to this topic. We are going to read the question together, and we're going to look at the solution for this question basically. Antique Amaze is the manufacturer of designer frames. The cost of each frame is the sum of 3 variable costs. That's basically direct material cost, direct manufacturing labor cost, and manufacturing overhead. And one fixed cost category, that is manufacturing overhead costs. Okay, so they have three variable costs and one fixed cost basically. Variable manufacturing overhead cost is allocated to each frame based on the budgeted direct manufacturing labor hour per frame. So this is important. This is the basis for the allocation of the variable overhead costs. For June 2017, each frame is budgeted to take 4 labor hours. So this is basically the budgeted, okay, hours that they need to produce one frame. The budgeted variable manufacturing overhead cost per labor is 12. This is also again information on the budgeted cost per labor hour, that is 12. And the budgeted number of frames to be manufactured is 1040. This is the amount that they budgeted that they want to produce. Alright, now move on, and we have to look at the other information given to us. Actual variable manufacturing costs were 52,164 for 1080 frames. So it seems that although they budgeted they want to produce 1040, in reality they produced 1080, and the actual cost 52164. Okay, no beginning or ending inventories for the frame, and this is not source, this is frame. Actual direct manufacturing labor hour for June were 4536, and they want us to compute the flexible budget variance, the spending variance, and the efficiency variance for variable manufacturing overhead, and give comment on the result. Alright, so here is basically the solution for the questions, this question. So if you look at this solution or the answer, again, this is in the columnar form, and we have to prepare something like this, and it comprises of 3 main column. The first one, actual cost incurred. The second one is where in actual input quantity times with budgeted rate, and this is the flexible budget. Okay, so as for column 1 and column 2, this is something we have to examine first. Actual input quantity is 4536. This is given, okay, because it's based on direct manufacturing labor hour, as we can see here. Alright, so this is the allocation base that we use. So actual direct manufacturing labor hours were 4536. This is actual times with the actual rate. So the rate is not given to us straightforwardly, but we have to calculate for that, because we already know the cost is 52,164, and we know that the allocation base is based on direct manufacturing labor hours. So we divide with 4536, so we can get the price of 11 ringgit and 50 cents. Okay, so the total for column 1 is 52,164. Column number 2 is quite straightforward. Just take the actual input quantity 4536 times with 12. 12 is actually given to us. This is the budgeted manufacturing overhead cost per labor hour, that is 12. Alright, simple. So times with 12, and you can get here 54,432. And if you compare between the actual and the budgeted, this column 1 and column 2, what makes different is actually just on price. This is 11 ringgit and 50 cents. This is 12 ringgit. The budgeted is higher than actual, means this is good, so it leads to spending variance, favorable spending variance of 2268. Okay, now we look at the efficiency variance. We compare between column 2 and column 3. Column 3, as usual, budgeted input quantity allowed for actual output. So the actual output is actually 1080, as you can see here. Actual variable manufacturing costs were blah 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 for 1080 frames. So it is not 1040. 1040 is for the budgeted. The actual is 1080. So in column 3 is always budgeted input quantity allowed for actual output. So you have to pay an extra careful, or pay more attention on this. Alright, so the budgeted rate is 12, and the hour the budgeted input quantity is 4 hours, 4 labor hours, this is given to you, times with actual output times with price, so you can get here the 51,840. And if you look at this situation, okay, the input quantity, the actual is higher than the budgeted input quantity. So in terms of efficiency, it leads to unfavorable situation where the actual input quantity is, this one is higher than what they already budgeted. So that's why this company received, like in terms of efficiency variance is unfavorable up to 2,592. Okay, so this question asks you to prepare some comments. So Antec Emis had a favorable spending variance of 2268 because the actual variable overhead rate was 11 ringgit 50 per direct manufacturing labor hour versus 12 ringgit budgeted. As we can see that this is higher than this is lower actually, so that's why it leads to favorable situation for spending variance. Nevertheless, for efficiency variance, we can see that it is unfavorable in the sense that as we can see here, because each frame averaged 4.2 labor hours versus 4 hours budgeted labor hours. Okay, so as for here, we can see that the number of hours they budgeted to produce one frame is just 4 hours. Nevertheless, in reality, when it happened, the company have to spend 4.2 hours for each of the frame, because after we divide 4,536 hours in actual, divide with 1080, okay, we can get here total is, alright, 4,536 divide with 1080, we can get here 4.2 hours. So basically, in terms of efficiency, it is not that efficient, so it leads to unfavorable situation in efficiency variance. Alright, that's all for this topic. I'll see you again on chapter 4. Have a nice day to all of you. Bye bye.